Have you ever driven down a lonely highway at night? The kind of road where your headlights are the only thing cutting through the endless dark, and the silence makes every sound feel louder than it should? Now imagine this. You're exhausted, you've been driving for hours, and suddenly you see an old neon sign flickering in the distance. A motel. It looks run down, but it's the only place for miles. You pull in, thinking it's just another cheap roadside stop. But once you step inside, you realize something is very wrong. This isn't just a motel. This is a place where time doesn't move normally, where rooms don't stay the same, where guests check in but don't always check out. Tonight, I'm going to tell you three terrifying stories connected to this cursed motel. Stories of people who thought they were simply stopping for the night, only to find themselves trapped in something far darker. That a truck driver who swore he saw a woman staring back at him from the mirror, even though he was alone. A family who discovered that the photographs hanging on the motel room wall seemed to change every single night. And a lone traveler who opened the guest book and found his own name written in it, dated 1 year before he had even arrived. Some call it an urban legend. Others claim it's real. But one thing is certain. These stories will make you think twice before ever pulling over at a lonely motel on a deserted highway. Story 1. The truck driver and the woman in the mirror. It was sometime around 2:30 in the morning when Daniel, a long-haul truck driver, saw the flickering neon lights in the distance. He had been on the road for nearly 12 hours straight, and his eyes burned from the strain of staring at the endless highway. The caffeine from his last gas station coffee had worn off, and every muscle in his body begged him to pull over. The sign was old, the kind you almost expect to see in a black and white horror film. Moonlight Motel, vacancy. The M in moonlight buzzed and crackled, glowing dimmer than the other letters. Daniel slowed his 18-wheeler and pulled into the gravel lot, where just three other cars sat scattered near the building. The motel itself looked tired, with paint peeling from its wooden siding and a crooked front office sign swinging in the night breeze. But Daniel didn't care. All he needed was a bed and a few hours of sleep before he continued his route. Inside the lobby, an elderly man sat behind the counter, his face pale and wrinkled like crumpled paper. He wore a faded motel uniform, though the badge pinned to his chest was so scratched that the name couldn't be read anymore. "Room for the night?" the man asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah, just one night," Daniel replied, signing the register. The man slid over a tarnished brass key attached to a cracked plastic tag. "Room 6, end of the hall." Daniel carried his duffel bag down the narrow corridor, the sound of his boots echoing against the linoleum floor. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and the buzzing light above him flickered every few seconds. Room 6 was at the very end, just as the old man said. The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, the room was small but decent enough. A queen-sized bed with faded floral sheets, a wooden dresser, and a single armchair by the window. But what immediately caught Daniel's attention was the mirror. It stood tall against the wall opposite the bed, an old, full-length mirror framed in dark oak. Unlike the rest of the furniture, the glass looked pristine, almost unnaturally clean, as if someone had just polished it. Daniel set down his bag and collapsed onto the bed. For a moment, he just stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above him, the hum lulling him closer to sleep. But before he could close his eyes, something in the mirror caught his attention. A flickered that he sat up, blinking. The reflection of the room looked normal: bed, chair, dresser, everything exactly where it should be. But for a split second, he thought he had seen movement. Maybe it was his imagination, he told himself. He was exhausted, shaking it off. Daniel went to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face. When he returned, the mirror seemed different. It wasn't obvious at first, but as he stood there staring, he realized it. The bed in the reflection was empty. Daniel froze. His own body wasn't in the mirror. He waved a hand slowly in front of it. Nothing. The reflection showed the room perfectly, but not him. His chest tightened. What the hell? And then, without warning, a figure appeared. That it was a woman, standing just behind the bed in the reflection. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the dim light, and her dark hair clung to her face in wet strands. She wore a long white dress that looked stained with something dark around the hem. Her head tilted slowly to the side, as though she were studying him. Daniel spun around, expecting to see her in the room. But the bed was empty. The room was empty. When he turned back to the mirror, she was closer. Now she stood right behind the glass, her hands pressed against it, her lips moving soundlessly as though whispering something he couldn't hear. Daniel stumbled back, his legs shaking. No, 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 no. The air in the room grew icy, his breath visible as he backed toward the door. He grabbed the handle and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked, tighter than it should have been. He twisted and pulled, but the knob refused to turn. Behind him, the mirror groaned, the sound of glass straining under pressure. He turned just in time to see cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. The woman's face twisted into a grin, sharp and unnatural. As though her mouth had been stretched too far, that a voice hissed inside his head, not from the room, but from everywhere at once. Stay with me. The glass shattered. Daniel shielded his face, stumbling back as shards rained down across the floor. But when he looked again, the mirror was whole, perfect, as if nothing had happened. The woman was gone. Shaking, Daniel rushed forward and finally wrenched the door open. He sprinted down the hall, not caring that his bag and wallet were still in the room. He burst into the lobby, gasping. The old man behind the desk looked up slowly, his eyes dull and lifeless. Everything all right in room 6? He asked calmly, as though nothing had happened. Daniel stammered. There's someone. In the mirror, the man's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Room 6 has always had a mirror problem, he said softly. Daniel didn't wait for more. He ran out the door, climbed into his truck, and peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind his tires. He didn't stop driving until the sun came up and the cursed neon sign was miles behind him. Years later, when he told the story to other drivers at a truck stop, most laughed, saying he was just sleep-deprived. But a few grew quiet. One man even leaned closer and whispered, "Room 6. You saw her too, didn't you?" Story 2. The family and the changing pictures for the Andersons. The motel was nothing more than a convenient stop. They were driving cross-country for summer vacation, 3 kids stuffed in the back seat of their minivan, while Mark and his wife Linda took turns behind the wheel. By the time they reached that lonely stretch of highway, everyone was exhausted, hungry, and cranky. When the glowing sign for the Moonlight Motel appeared on the horizon, Mark felt a wave of relief. "It's not exactly the Hilton," Linda muttered as the van rolled into the gravel lot. "But I think it'll do." The lobby smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, and the walls were yellowed with age. The old man behind the counter barely looked up as Mark checked them in, his gnarled fingers sliding a set of keys across the counter. "Room 8, he rasped. "Enjoy your stay." Room 8 was larger than Mark expected. Two beds with heavy quilted blankets, a TV bolted to the dresser, and a faded carpet patterned with swirls. The kids ran inside immediately, bouncing onto the beds with the energy only children seem to have after a 10-hour drive. But what stood out most were the framed pictures hanging on the walls above. The dresser was a black and white photo of a family from the 1940s: father, mother, and two children, all dressed stiffly for the camera. On the opposite wall, a painting of a forest scene, trees stretching into the distance beneath a cloudy sky. Linda frowned at the photographs. "Creepy decor," she whispered that night after they settled in. Strange things began to happen. The first to notice was their oldest daughter, Emily. She was brushing her teeth in the bathroom when she suddenly called out, "Mom? Dad, did you change the picture?" Mark looked up from unpacking bags. "What picture?" "The one of the family," Emily said, pointing. "It looks different." Mark studied the frame. At first, he thought Emily was just tired. But then he realized she was right. The father in the black and white photo had turned his head slightly, so instead of staring forward, his eyes seemed to follow the room. Linda shook her head. "It's probably just the lighting. Old photos can look weird." Emily didn't look convinced. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, Mark noticed something else. The children in the photo, there were three of them now. The original two, plus a third boy standing just behind them. His face was pale, blurry, as though the photograph hadn't been developed properly. "Linda," Mark whispered, "come look at this." She froze when she saw it. That, that wasn't there yesterday. They tried to brush it off, convincing themselves it was just fatigue, their imaginations playing tricks. But every night they stayed in room 8, the pictures changed out on the second night. The forest painting seemed darker. The trees that once stretched into a cloudy horizon now appeared twisted, gnarled, almost skeletal. Shadows stretched between the trunks, and if you looked closely, you could swear something was hiding among them. Something with glowing eyes on the third night. The photo of the family showed the children smiling, their mouths just a little too wide. The blurry boy was clearer now, his hand resting on the shoulder of the youngest child as though he belonged there. Emily refused to sleep in the same room after that. She begged her parents to leave, but Mark was stubborn. "It's just old artwork," he insisted. "We'll be gone in the morning." But the morning never came the way it should have. That night, Mark woke to a faint sound. At first, he thought it was the TV, but the screen was dark. Then he realized it was coming from the walls. A whisper that he sat up, listening. The voices were soft, distant, but growing clearer. Children's voices. Laughing. Mark turned to wake Linda, but she was already sitting up, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" The whispers grew louder, echoing around the room. The kids stirred in their beds, shifting uncomfortably as the sound of laughter became sharper, almost cruel. Mark glanced at the photographs. The family inside was no longer sitting stiffly. They were pressed against the glass, their faces twisted in wide, unnatural grins. The third boy now stood in front of them, pointing outward, pointing at the Andersons. Then the forest painting began to move. Shadows slid between the trees, figures darting in and out of sight. The glowing eyes in the background crept closer and closer until they pressed against the canvas itself, as if something inside was trying to push through. Suddenly, every picture in the room rattled violently against the walls. The frames shook, glass cracking, as the children's laughter turned into a high-pitched scream. The Anderson kids woke up screaming too. Emily cried out, "They're coming!" The glass in the family photo shattered. Shards flew across the room, embedding in the carpet. But worse was what stepped through. The blurry boy from the photograph was no longer blurry. He stood in the room, pale and barefoot, his eyes dark voids. Behind him, the rest of the family leaned half out of the frame, their hands stretching unnaturally long as they clawed toward the real world. Mark grabbed his children, shouting for Linda. Together they scrambled for the door, but it wouldn't open. The knob twisted uselessly in his hand, the same as Daniel's had in room 6 that the boy stepped closer, his head tilting, mouth curling into a grin that revealed too many teeth. His whisper carried through the room, soft but unmistakable. "Stay with us." The forest painting split open, the canvas tearing like fabric. From inside, shadows poured out, filling the room with writhing, clawing shapes. The glowing eyes emerged, dozens of them, staring hungrily. With one final desperate shove, Mark ripped the door open. The family stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind them. The second the door clicked, the noises stopped. Silence. They ran to the lobby, children crying, Linda clutching them close. The old man at the desk looked up, his expression eerily calm. "Room 8," he said slowly. Always was a lively one. Mark didn't wait for explanations. He dragged his family out of the motel, piling them into the van and speeding away into the night. Years later, Linda refused to talk about that night. But Emily, now an adult, still remembers. She remembers the way the boy smiled at her. She remembers how, just before the door shut, he whispered directly to her, "See you soon." Story 3. The Lone Traveler and the Guest Book. It was just after midnight when Jacob pulled off the highway. He'd been driving west for hours, his only company the low hum of the radio and the rhythmic thrum of tires against asphalt. He wasn't on vacation like the Andersons had been, and he wasn't hauling cargo like Daniel. Jacob was traveling alone because he had nowhere else to be, that a recent breakup had left him restless. His apartment felt like a tomb, and the silence there was unbearable. So he drove. No destination, just miles of empty road. When he saw the neon flicker of the Moonlight Motel, part of him hesitated. The place looked wrong. The sign buzzed, casting sickly red and yellow light across the parking lot, and the building sagged as though it carried centuries of weight. But he was tired. He told himself all roadside motels looked a little creepy after midnight. The man at the desk didn't smile when Jacob walked in. He slid a guest book across the counter and handed him a pen without a word. Jacob scribbled his name and the date. Jacob Miles, July 12th, 2019. The old man pushed a key toward him. Room 3. Room 3 was cramped, but clean enough. A single bed, a nightstand, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. On the desk sat a thick, leather-bound book. Jacob frowned. Another guest book? Curiosity got the better of him. He opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with names and dates, handwritten in ink that had faded with time. Some of the entries were decades old. The earliest one Jacob found was from 1962. Most seemed ordinary, names of travelers. Short notes like, "nice stay," or "bed was comfortable." But the further he read, the stranger the entries became. Notes like, "don't look in the mirror after dark." "Room 8 won't let us sleep." "The pictures are changing." "If you see her, don't answer." Jacob frowned, flipping faster now. The names blurred together until he froze on a page near the middle. There it was. His own name, Jacob Miles, July 12th, 2018. 1 year earlier, to the day. His blood ran cold. He hadn't been here before. He was certain of it. Yet the handwriting was unmistakably his own. Same slant, same sharp hook at the end of the S. He slammed the book shut, his heart pounding. This was some kind of joke. Maybe the staff had copied his name from the register. But why? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Jacob tossed and turned, the sound of the buzzing neon sign bleeding through the thin walls. At some point, exhaustion dragged him under, but his dreams were restless. He dreamt of sitting at the desk, writing in the book, over and over again. Each time, when he looked up, the date was wrong, always 1 year earlier. When he woke, the book was open on the desk. He was certain he'd closed it. The page it rested on was blank. He leaned closer, heart racing. Before his eyes, words began to etch themselves into the paper. The pen beside the book didn't move, yet letters scratched across the page in jagged strokes. Jacob Miles, July 12th, 2020. His name. Next year's date. Jacob stumbled back, his chair clattering to the floor. His breath came fast, sweat beading on his forehead. He grabbed the book with trembling hands and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud, snapping shut. Silence filled the air. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the door. "Who's there?" Jacob shouted, his voice cracking. No answer. Another knock, louder this time. The door shuddered against its hinges. Jacob backed toward the bed, his eyes darting to the book on the floor. It lay half open, and through the crack he could see words forming again, ink bleeding across the page as if an invisible hand wrote them. "Let us in." The knocks became pounding, shaking the entire room. The lamp flickered, the walls groaning as though the building itself were alive. Jacob rushed to the door, fumbling with the knob, but it wouldn't turn. It was stuck, just like room 6, just like room 8. A whisper slipped through the cracks around the frame. Dozens of voices overlapping, soft and urgent. "Join us. Join us. You already belong here." The guest book flew open with a violent snap. The pages turned rapidly, fluttering as though caught in a storm. Finally, they stopped on a single blank sheet. Words slashed themselves across it in frantic strokes. Jacob Miles, July 12th, 2019. Final stay. The pounding stopped. Silence pressed against the room. Jacob's ears rang with the absence of sound. Slowly, he turned toward the book. The page was empty again. Heart racing, he grabbed his bag and bolted for the door. This time, it opened easily. He didn't question it. He ran through the hallway, down the stairs, past the front desk. The old man was there, waiting, his pale eyes fixed on Jacob. Going somewhere? The man asked softly. Jacob didn't answer. He sprinted across the parking lot, threw himself into his car, and sped away, gravel spraying beneath his tires. He didn't stop for miles. Not until the cursed neon sign was nothing but a fading glow in his rearview mirror. But later that night, when he checked into a different motel, one that felt ordinary, safe, he unpacked his bag and froze. There at the bottom lay the leather-bound guest book that it was open to the last page. His name was still there, Jacob Miles, July 12th, 2019. Final stay. Asterisk, and that was the cursed motel on the highway. 3 different stories, 3 different guests, but the same chilling place where time twists, rooms change, and no one ever truly leaves. Maybe it's just an urban legend. Maybe it's nothing more than the imagination of tired travelers. Or maybe the next time you see a flickering neon sign on an empty stretch of road, you'll remember these stories and keep driving. Tell me, would you dare spend a night there? Let me know your answer in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed these terrifying tales, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. Because who knows? The next nightmare I share might just be waiting for you.